Louisa Maria Teresa Stuart, known to Jacobites as the Princess Royal, was the last child of James II and VII, the deposed King of England, Scotland, and Ireland, and of his Queen, Mary of Modena. In English she was called Louisa Maria and Louise Marie in French. A Royal Stuart Society paper calls Louisa Maria the Princess over the water, an allusion to the informal title King over the water of the Jacobite pretenders, none of whom had any other legitimate daughters. Birth: Louisa Maria was born in 1692, at Saint-Germain-en-Laye, during her parents' exile. Owing to the huge controversy which had surrounded the birth of her brother, James Francis Edward, with accusations of the substitution of another baby in a warming pan following a stillbirth, James II had sent letters inviting not only his daughter, Queen Mary II, to attend the birth in person, but also a large number of other Protestant ladies. Of all her legitimate siblings and half-siblings, only her brother James Francis Edward and her half-sisters, Queen Mary II and Queen Anne, survived infancy. Mary died while Louisa Maria was still a small child, but she was on friendly terms with her half-sister Anne. The Whig historian Macaulay later commented on James's precaution. Had some of those witnesses been invited to St. James's on the morning of the 10th of June 1688, the House of Stuart might perhaps now be reigning in our island. But it is easier to keep a crown than to regain one. It might be true that a calumnious fable had done much to bring about the revolution, but it by no means followed that the most complete refutation of that fable would bring about a restoration. Not a single lady crossed the sea in obedience to James's call. His queen was safely delivered of a daughter, but this event produced no perceptible effect on the state of public feeling in England. The newborn princess was given the names Louisa and Maria in baptism, while Teresa was added later at the time of her confirmation. She was given the name Louisa in honor of King Louis XIV, who acted as her godfather. Her godmother was King Louis's sister-in-law, Elizabeth Charlotte, Princess Palatine, Duchess of Orleans. After the birth, James II declared that Louisa Maria had been sent by God as a consolation for her parents at the time of the distress, and in later years she was often referred to as La Consolatrice. Louisa was the only full sibling of Prince James Francis Edward, the old pretender, to survive infancy, and was 4 years younger than her brother. The two were brought up together in France. Louisa's tutor was an English Roman Catholic priest, Father Constable, who taught her Latin, history, and religion. She also had a governess, the Countess of Middleton, wife of the Jacobite peer Charles, 2nd Earl of Middleton. James Drummond, 4th Earl of Perth, another Jacobite peer living in France, praised the child's natural affability. An allegorical portrait by Alexis-Simon Belle of James Francis Edward and his sister Louisa Maria, showing the prince as a guardian angel leading his sister under the gaze of cherubim, was painted in 1699 and is now in the royal collection. By the summer of 1701, King James was seriously ill, and had been away from Saint-Germain seeking medical treatment, accompanied by his wife. However, in June the two returned home for the birthdays of the two children, and 2 months later James suffered a stroke, dying just 2 weeks later on the 16th of September. He was still able to talk when his children visited him for the last time, and to Louisa Maria he said, "Adieu, my dear child. Serve your Creator in the days of your youth. Consider virtue as the greatest ornament of your sex. Follow close the great pattern of it. Your mother, who has been, no less than myself, overclouded with calumny, But time, the mother of truth, will, I hope, at last make her virtues shine as bright as the sun. Soon after James's death, Louis XIV proclaimed James Francis Edward as King of England, Scotland and Ireland, and he was also formally recognized as king by Spain, the Papal States and Modena. He and his sister Louisa Maria were transferred to Passy, into the care of Antoine Lompard de Cormont and his wife, with Lady Middleton continuing as Louisa Maria's governess there. In 1705, at the age of 13, Louisa Maria was a guest of honor at a ball at the Château de Marly, ranking only after Louis XIV himself, her own mother Queen Mary, and her brother James Francis Edward, considered by Louis to be another king. On the 23rd of March 1708, after a delay caused by the measles, the young James attempted a landing on Scottish soil, at the Firth of Forth, supported by a fleet of French ships. However, the force was driven off by a Royal Navy fleet led by Admiral Byng. Louisa Maria enjoyed dancing and the opera, and became popular at the French court. Two possible matches for her were considered, with Louis XIV's grandson Charles, Duke of Berry, and with King Charles XII of Sweden. Neither took place, the first apparently due to Louisa Maria's equivocal position, and the second because the young King of Sweden was not a Roman Catholic. Louisa felt keenly that Jacobites in exile had made huge sacrifices for her family, and she herself paid for the daughters of many of them to be educated. In this, she made no distinction between Roman Catholics and Protestants, supporting the daughters of both. Death. In April 1712, both James Francis Edward and his sister fell sick with smallpox. While the old pretender recovered, Louisa Maria died on the 18th of April and was buried with her father at the Church of the English Benedictines in Paris. A French nobleman wrote of the death of the princess to a friend at Utrecht: "My lord, I send to you by these the sad and deplorable news of the much lamented death of the Princess Royal of England, who died of the smallpox the 18th of this month at St. Germain's, who as she was one of the greatest ornaments of that afflicted court, so she was the admiration of all Europe. Never princess was so universally regretted. Her death has filled all France with sighs, groans and tears. She was a princess of a majestical mien and port, his every emotion spoke grandeur, every action was easy and without any affectation of meanness, and proclaimed her heroine descended from the long race of so many paternal and maternal heroes." William Legge, 1st Earl of Dartmouth, the British Secretary of State, wrote of the princess's death: "The Queen showed me a letter wrote in the King of France's own hand, upon the death of her sister, in which there was the highest character that ever was given to any princess of her age. Mr. Richard Hill came straight from the Earl of Godolphin's to me with the news, and said it was the worst that ever came to England. I asked him why he thought so. He said it had been happy if it had been her brother, for then the Queen might have sent for her and married her to Prince George, who could have no pretensions during her own life, which would have pleased every honest man in the kingdom, and made an end of all disputes for the future." Madame de Maintenon, the morganatic second wife of Louis XIV, wrote of Mary of Modena's reaction to Louisa Maria's death: "I had the honor of passing 2 hours with the Queen of England, who is the very image of desolation. The princess had become her friend and only consolation." In his The History of the Church of Scotland, Thomas Stevens says of the death: "On the 12th of April this year, the Princess Louisa Maria Teresa, youngest daughter of the late King James, died of the smallpox at St. Germain's, to the regret of many in England, even of those who were unfriendly to her brother's claims. She received a very high character from those who had an opportunity of appreciating it, and was a princess justly esteemed for her wit, and all those qualities worthy of her high birth." Like many other churches in Paris, the Church of the English Benedictines was desecrated and vandalized during the French Revolution. According to Jules Janin, writing in 1844, the remains of Princess Louisa Maria and her father King James II were then resting in the military hospital of the Val de Grace. Portraits. Several portraits of Louisa Maria survive. Among those of Louisa Maria alone, one is by François de Troyes, California, 1705, while another, painted about 1704, is attributed to Alexis-Simon Belle and is in the National Portrait Gallery, London. Also in the National Portrait Gallery is a portrait painted in 1695 by Nicolas de Largieri of Louisa Maria with her brother James Francis Edward. This was engraved as a mezzotint by John Smith and published in 1699. Another portrait of Louisa Maria with her brother, depicting him as an angel, is in the Royal Collection and is again attributed to Belle. A portrait with a Cavalier King Charles Spaniel was engraved as a mezzotint by Bernard Lenz II and published c. 1700. In fiction, Princess Louisa appears at the age of 12 in Eliza Haywood's picaresque novel The Fortunate Foundlings. Hayward says of Louisa, "The ladies who attended her were all of them much of the same age, and to show the respect the French had for this royal family, though in misfortunes, were also the daughters of persons whose birth and fortune might have done honor to the service of the greatest empress in the world. In beauty, the princess herself was esteemed a prodigy." Namesakes. The names Louisa Maria Teresa were later used for Louisa Maria Teresa of Parma, Queen Consort of Charles IV of Spain, for Louise Marie Thérèse of France, the eldest daughter of Charles Ferdinand, Duke of Berry, born 1819, and for Louise Marie Thérèse Charlotte Isabelle of Orléans, daughter of King Louis-Philippe of France and the Queen of King Leopold I of Belgium. Ancestry. Sources: Ancestors of Louisa Maria Teresa, Princess of England, Scotland and Ireland at worldroots.com. Addington, AC, The Royal House of Stuart. Bibliography. A true and full account of the death and character of the Princess Royal, Louisa Maria Teresa Stuart, daughter of the late King James, who was born in the year 1692, at St. Germain's, and died of the smallpox the 18th of April 1712. In a letter from a nobleman of France, to his correspondent at Vitrecht Broadside 2s. 1712. Cole, Susan, Princess Over the Water, a memoir of Louise Marie Stuart.